morning, y'all. How y'all doing? Good. So 2 of you are good. How the rest of y'all doing? You doing all right? Okay, good. Welcome to Zion City Church. Thank you guys so much for being with us. We have made it through yet another series in 2020. Give yourselves and our pastor a hand. Yes, we made it through the book of Daniel. And if your life has been anything like mine, it feels like 2020 has been like the year of Daniel, except minus the lions. And so it has been pretty intense. And so what we want to do today is we want to go through this last series that we just went through. So if it's your first time today with us, thank you so much for being here. Hopefully you'll get a little bit of a taste of what this house is like and what these people are like and how our pastor teaches and goes through the word, because it's incredible and it's a blessing. And we hope you come back when he is teaching the good book. And we hope that if this series, you were here for this whole series or part of the series, that this is a good reminder and a refresher. So break out your notebooks and pens and make sure to take notes. Also, this entire series is available on our website and Spotify and Apple Podcasts and stuff like that if you want to catch up on that series and listen to it. So feel free to do that. My name is Jake. I'm the pastor of worship here at Zion City Church, and this is our teaching pastor, Andrew Rael. And we're just going to go through this series one week at a time from the beginning. So take it away, bro.
Yes. So we thought it was like a good thing. If you're anything like us or like myself, you're always like receiving content. And you always like take notes and do stuff like that, but how often do you actually go back and review those things, right? It's like not as much as you probably should. So after we finished our prayer series, we just felt like it was a good idea just to stop and talk about, have conversations, more conversations around prayer. And everyone was like, why haven't you guys done that again? And we're like, well, we haven't known. So this is something we're going to try and do as a rhythm of our church, just to kind of stop and look back and reflect on the things that God was speaking to us, how God was moving, and what we were learning from the series, as just a way to just kind of review these different things so they can kind of tuck back into our hearts. And if you had missed any week because you were camping or visiting family or Thanksgiving or whatever, right, it's an opportunity for you to get a little bit of recap on the series and then go back and watch some different stuff later. So we started the series with a sermon titled Becoming a Creative Minority. And this was really the launch pad for the entire series, right? Because we talked about how it is as we as followers of Jesus live in the world that we have today here in 2020. How we navigate the waters of trying to be faithful to Jesus and trying to live in the world that we find ourselves in the day of the iPhone and Netflix and technology and pandemic and all the stuff that our lives are bringing to us. How do we remain faithful to Jesus? And we said it's by us becoming a creative minority, which we've defined as this: a committed community of Jesus, faithfully living into the compelling story of God against all odds for the sake of the city. That we as followers of Jesus are people who live on a mission. And so we talked, there's a couple different ways the church has chosen to respond to culture over time. The first one was to retreat. Right? This is like the monks and stuff like that, where they're just saying, this world is just going to hell in a handbasket. We're out, right? We're just going to go get a nice piece of land somewhere and just have like a perpetual fellowship thing. Only believers allowed in here, right? And we're just going to spend time with God in a way. And we realize that when we retreat, we forsake mission, right? We forsake the things that God has called us to. The other end of that spectrum is to compromise, right? And I think this is really the pull on the generations that are rising up now is just straight up compromise. It's, I'm gonna follow Jesus secretly behind the scenes, but I'm gonna allow compromise in every area of my life. That I will claim Jesus with my mouth, but not actually follow him with my life. And we live in this realm of hypocrisy where we're preaching one thing with our mouth, but living an entirely other thing with our lives. The next was to institutionalize, right? And this is where churches think that the response then is, okay, if it's not retreat and if it's not compromise, then the way that we get there is we institutionalize that everything will funnel through the church. We make the church like a whole government that everything will flow through and be through. But what happens when things institutionalize is corruption sets in, right? You have all of this power has been consolidated and brought in, and then what tends to happen is corruption. And so the other end of that is, okay, instead of compromise, retreat, or institutionalize, it's what's called dualism, which is both and. But what this tends to lead to is just straight up hypocrisy. Martin Luther was a famous advocate for this way of living. It's, we just, both are true. Both I follow Jesus and this culture, is what it is, and we just kind of deal with it. But that what ends up happening too is then a life of hypocrisy, that you proclaim one thing with your mouth and live another with your life, and you begin to drift more towards compromise and less towards holiness. So we said, out of all those options, we're going to make a fifth way, and that's being a creative minority. And we learn from the life of Jesus that means we establish new paradigms, right? The famous story we looked at was when people came to ask Jesus if he's to pay taxes to Caesar or not, that Jesus didn't even play their game. He created a whole new paradigm saying, I'm not going to even answer your question. I'm going to say, give to Caesar what is Caesar's and give to God's what is God's, right? And specifically what he's talking about there is he says, whose image is on the coin? And they say, Caesar's. And so he says, give to Caesar what is Caesar's, give to God's what is God's, which as Bible scholars, what's popping in your mind is this idea of image, which we went through all that in the scriptures, right? Where image is this idea of an idol, but it's also a representative. And so if the image of the coin is Caesar, Jesus didn't give that to Caesar's, but he says, whatever God's image is on, give that to him. Wow. Now, who bears God's image? You and me, yeah. Exactly. So he's saying, hey, give him whatever he's asking for. You know, be respectful to government authorities, but listen, never give your allegiance. Never give who you are at the core of your being.
Yeah, man, so much there already. I feel like we just hit the first week, and there's a lot of things. Two things that I really like in the words creative minority. So one, being creative, I like that idea of we're going to create a new category. So there are ways that people have responded for eons and ages and things like that. But we need to create new paradigms and new ways to do things as followers of Jesus, and the example of Jesus doing that there, I think, was amazing. The second word that kind of hit me just this morning was minority. It is not majority.
Yep. It
does not mean that this is popular. It does not mean that everyone is doing this. It does not mean that this is going to be easy. But yes, in the title even itself, it's kind of just proposing itself as this is a small group, this is a remnant, and yes, this is a small minority. So
yes, absolutely. And the final two things on that message was the way that we be a creative minority is one, through faithfulness, and second, through influence. Faithfulness first, maintaining our identity in Jesus without ever compromising our values. Maintaining our identity in Jesus without ever compromising our values. And two is influence, meaning that we live compelling lives that want to draw people onto Jesus, that the way that we live our lives would be an invitation for other people to want to follow him also. And so that means practically we build instead of destroy. So in our culture, followers of Jesus are at the forefront, trying to tear everything down, trying to criticize, trying to be cruel, but instead, we're people who build things instead. We don't just complain about all the things that are broken. We say we're going to build better things instead. Instead of being people who decrease during this time, Jeremiah tells the people in Babylon that they need to multiply and increase, that our family needs to expand and to grow, not just in the bearing of children, but also as a family. We go as disciples and make disciples, right? We become a larger family. The next thing is to seek peace and prosperity instead of spreading cynicism. We are so good at spreading. It's never going to change. It's always a corrupt politicians. It's always going to be bad. Instead, we spread peace and prosperity. We seek those things in our city. And then lastly, we pray instead of complain. That we are just people who are committed to taking things to God rather than telling everybody else about how awful that it is. And we believe that prayer actually changes things. And that's how we kind of encapsulated being a creative minority.
Now, this first message of the series, if I'm remembering correctly, did not actually start in Daniel, right? This was the framework and the foundation of the series.
Correct.
So how did you kind of compile this as the foundation of the book of Daniel and those kind of things to be the kind of theme to start us out in this book?
Yeah, so Daniel is living in a reality that Jeremiah talked about before it even happened. And so for Daniel, as he's living in his world, right, he's reading what the prophet Jeremiah had written years before all of this took place. And Jeremiah tells them in Jeremiah 29, this is how you then should live. And so it seek to speak peace and prosperity of the city. And so even later on, you see that as Daniel's nearing the end of his life, he goes back to that passage in Jeremiah and is like, hey, 70 years are supposed to be coming up soon. What's going to happen, Lord? And the Lord tells him that the people haven't even changed, so exile is going to be longer. So for Daniel, this passage, this book, this moment shaped his whole life. And I think of no better framework for us to have to launch us into the series of Daniel than the very thing Daniel clung to during his time in Babylon, this passage in Jeremiah.
That's incredible. So second week, we actually did jump into Daniel 1. Tell us about that.
Yes, we did that. It's a message called A Holy Resolve. And so Briefly summarizing, right? Daniel shows up to Babylon and they start to try to change him. They change his clothes, they change his dress, they change the school he goes to give him education. They try to form him into a Babylonian. And Daniel basically receives and accepts all of these things except for one, which is eating at the king's table. Now this sounds like strange. It's like, dude, of all things, like this is where you draw the line. Like, no, I will not eat the buffet, right? But for Daniel, this was a symbol of dependence upon the king. And so when he refused to eat from the table of the king, what he was saying was, you might think that you're God and you might think that everybody needs to depend on you, but I certainly do not. Now the people who were overseeing Daniel were like, dude, bad idea. Like, you need to be getting like fit and eating a lot of protein and protein shakes and all this other stuff, right? Because you need to look fit before you go into the king's service. And Daniel says, look, man, I'll just eat straight up vegetables and fruit. And he says, and I promise you, at the end of this time, God's going to show up and show himself strong and reveal that. So one, this is not an actual diet plan, right? People have taken this and they're like, the Daniel diet, and they sell it to you, like only fruits and vegetables. And this is how, no. This was a protest in Daniel's mind, and he didn't do this forever. He just did that for the time being to make a statement. So all of that is born out of Daniel's resolve and who he is. He says, I'm going to draw strategic lines in the sand that I will not cross. There'll be areas where we can compromise. We could have conversation. We could talk about things, but there's areas where I absolutely will not cross and establish those. Because here's what happens. If you do not have those lines, you will compromise. If you do not draw those lines in the sand, you will not remain faithful. So Daniel decided to draw those there. And so we are too being formed by our culture, and it's forming within us a cultural identity. And the language of our culture and the phrase of our culture is this: be true to yourself. Right? That's what you hear. That's in the magazine. That's in the YouTube clips of the self-help inspiration, is just be true to you. But there's a lot of problems with that ideology.
I was going to say, yeah, that sounds not bad on the surface. You hear that and you're like, well, what's wrong with that?
Exactly. Yeah, no, it's like, why wouldn't I be true to myself?
Yeah.
But there's a couple of issues. One is your own internal hypocrisy, right? So if I'm supposed to be true to me, what happens when I disagree with myself? You know, what happens when there's an internal conflict? Then who am I being true to? What part of myself am I being true to? Like, all of us like to think of ourselves as like pretty generous people, right? Until there's a situation comes up where you refuse to be generous, right? You're like, no, I'm not sharing any bit of that, right? There you have an internal conflict. You're not even consistent with the person you think yourself to be. And so what happens there is then a cycle begins to take place where when you fail to live up to the standards that you've even set up for yourself, it leads to guilt. And when you feel guilty, that ultimately leads to shame. Shame then leads to isolation, and isolation then leads to bitterness. And before you know it, the very identity you thought was bringing you freedom has actually brought you into bondage because you can't even live up to the things you've said for yourself. The next thing is about identity insecurity. Like, with that same framework, what happens when we get our identity based on approval and validation, right? Being true to yourself only feels good when people affirm that in you. And so what happens then is we live off of the approval or validation of others, which means we become either easily influenced or easily offended. Right, so we're easily influenced. We're wanting to fit in. We're wanting to match the cadence of our culture. And so we're looking for the praises of people. But if you looked at it and noticed anything for any amount of time, it is constantly changing. Yeah. And that is exhausting. 1 minute, this is cool. The next, like 1 minute, high-rise jeans are cool. So you go and buy a bunch of high-rise jeans. You show up, those are out now, bro. Right? We're doing bell bottoms again, and it's like, what do you do? It's constantly changing. It's constantly moving. The post is always moving, and even more moral-wise, it's constantly moving. It's never staying in the same place, right? Acceptance is great, except for this, and this. We don't accept those things, but it's always contingent upon this. It's exhausting. And so if you're constantly living for the approval of other people, you're running this race you're never going to win. And then the other side of that is not just being too easily influenced, but easily offended. The moment someone disagrees with you, they're not disagreeing with an idea that you have or something you're bringing forward. You think that they're disagreeing with who you are as a person. And so it's a threat. It's a violation of trust. It's not just, I don't see politics the same way. It's this, you offended me. You can't believe you would think that way, et cetera, because it's an attack at one's own identity. And then the last thing was an identity crisis, right? That what happens when what our identity is rooted in is taken from us. So let's say we put our identity in our career. Your career, let's say you were in a band and your band was taken off this year, right? You guys are about to drop new albums and tour your new record, and then a pandemic comes in, and guess what? You're playing shows on Zoom. You know what I mean? Or let's say you're a surgeon, right? And this is what you've put a lot of money towards, a lot of schooling towards. You get in a car accident, break your hand, your career's done. And we see this in athletes all the time, that once they get out of the league, they can no longer handle being a normal person, so they go and they blow all their money and get bankrupt or whatever, because they live their lives for so long rooting their identity and playing professional sports for thousands of people. And now that's taken away from you. So if your identity is rooted in something that you do, or your career, your vocation, your family, a relationship, what happens when that's taken away? What happens is honestly a death of a person. You feel that you are now grieving the person you used to be, mourning who you were, and you have to put your identity all back together again.
So what about the people that feel like maybe that has happened? You know, they have, whether it's this year or maybe it's not related to the pandemic at all, maybe it's just your own circumstance. What's kind of some hope for that situation there?
Yeah, so I would say what this year has done a beautiful job at showing us is how fragile things are, and how easy it is to put our trust in incredibly fragile things. And so my encouragement for you, if this has happened to you, is look, that has shown you that it does not produce any sort of stability, and you need to root yourself in who God says you are. And that identity that has been given to you by him, because no matter what happens, that's never taken away, right? No matter if you feel that you're a hypocrite, guess what? There's God's grace that meets you there and says, we're all hypocrites, right? But God's mercy showers us. When we are insecure, God says, hey, you don't have to be anything. You are already who I want you to be, and I've given you a purpose. And lastly is this identity crisis. It's, when something's taken away, it's like anything that has ever been lost, God can restore and give and shape whole new futures, that when even a situation looks completely hopeless, God speaks into the situation and hope is birthed. What may be a death of a dream may be a birth of a whole new dream in God's hands.
So what are some things then that are happening right now, things current and things relevant to people's lives that they can resolve to resist?
Yes, so 4 things I think that are so important for our church to resist. First is comfort. Man, we love comfortability, right? It's the word of our age, man. It's comfortable couches, comfortable lives, Netflix and streaming, and everything has to be close, and DoorDash. Like, it's come to the point where we've said we no longer want to go to a drive-through, right? The drive-through's coming to me, right? I'm staying in pajamas. I'm not even getting in the car to warm it up, right? I don't want to go cook food, right? I'm going to get food brought to me like a king in a palace, right? Comfort. And not that those things are bad. Praise the Lord for DoorDash, right? But that this is the current tide of our age, is to be so rooted in comfortability. And we did a whole message on that in the series, so I won't stay there too long. The next is distraction. Man, you ask somebody, how are you doing? And the first thing out of their mouth is busy. Busy, 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 busy. Now, do we have any less time than anybody in the history of time? No, right? Everyone has 24 hours a day. But what happens is how we fill those days. And if we're honest, if we were to have like a Netflix documentary follow us around and log every minute of our day, they'd be like, dude, you spend a lot of time, right, on the phone watching Netflix, and then I have no time, But it's kind of like our own making that we do those kind of things because we don't prioritize our time appropriately. The next, just honestly, is just straight up sexual sin. We live in a sexually rampant culture. That the bar has been progressively moved towards more sexual revolution than ever was before. I mean, what's allowed to be on television these days is really extreme. What's allowed to be in advertisements on the streets or on our cell phones is insane. And with followers of Jesus, we have to be aware how this is forming us. It is teaching us things about sex. And so as followers of Jesus, we must abstain from sexual immorality. Paul says, flee from that and pursue purity. And the last is compromise. And compromise doesn't look like someone holds a gun to your head and says, do you renounce Jesus? But compromise honestly looks like small decisions every single day to drift away from God. It started off at just no longer reading the Bible. I'm just tired. It's just hard. And then I started just not praying as much. I'm just so busy. I'm a parent. I have things going on. So then I started not going to church. I mean, Sunday mornings, it's cold in there or whatever, you know. And it's just like the little things build. And slowly over time, you've drifted. And you're off course. And so resolving in your heart to not compromise, to then realign your life with the things that you say that you value the most, and structuring your life around those things.
Incredible. Week 3, we were in Daniel chapter 2.
Yes.
This is where it gets crazy.
Yes. So week 3, we did a sermon titled The Better Story, right? And so what's happening here in the life of Daniel is that Nebuchadnezzar has this dream of a statue. And the dream is kind of cuckoo bananas crazy, right? The statue has all kinds of different metals on it, and then a rock comes from heaven, smashes it, and then that rock becomes a mountain. There you go. You know, like, what do I do with that? It's like, stop eating Taco Bell so late at night. But Daniel gets an interpretation for this dream that Nebuchadnezzar has, and interprets that dream for him, and lets him know that this that he's seeing in his mind is actually a message from God saying all sorts of kingdoms will rise and come up, but there's a kingdom that supersedes them all, that when that kingdom comes, all these other kingdoms will come to ruin. So Nebuchadnezzar, you are accountable for all the things that you do. You are not a god, you are a king who has authority and responsibility that you will be accountable for, so use it wisely is essentially the word. And so this is like living into a greater story, and the idea behind that is whoever tells the best story wins. And for us to live in a counter way to the world, we have to tell a better story. What followers of Jesus say is, hey, you're bad, stop being bad, God can make you better again, and just wait till he comes back. That's a terrible story. Like, who wants to live into that reality? Like, who wakes up like, woo, I'm awful, and I just want to wait till all this goes to hell in a handbasket and he comes back. Like, that's not a compelling story, and most importantly, that's not the story of the Scriptures.
Yeah, amen.
Yeah, the whole story of the Scriptures is this. One, you were made in the image of God with purpose and design and intent, and God created you in his likeness, in his image, right? But then what happens in the story is human beings take that as an opportunity to rebel against God and say, we want to define good and evil for ourselves, and ultimately bring sin and corruption and death on God's good world. But God, in his great love for you, says that's not where the story ends. I'm going to send my son Jesus, and you will have new life in him. And then after we receive this new life in Jesus, guess what God says? He says, join the team. Partner with me in making this place more like my place. When Jesus teaches us to pray, your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven, is an invitation to partner with God. And that's a compelling story. It's you are made with purpose. Our world is broken, but God is doing something here and now. And guess what? He wants you to be a part of it. Would you join him? That's a compelling story to draw people into. It draws them onto something greater than themselves and looking on to him.
I feel like right now, after Andrew just said a lot of that, I feel like there's probably a few people here in the room that heard those things that you said, and it felt like it was home for you, that there might be a story that you're living into that is not, what you felt like. This is not right. This is not the way it should be. And everything that Andrew just said kind of just hit home, and it felt like it was meant just for you. And so right now we're still doing this, and we're going to continue and move on. But before we do, I want to say, listen to those moments when God speaks. When those things happen and you feel like sometimes it's hard to recognize. Sometimes it just feels like, man, I really like that. I don't know what I like about that, but I just, it really spoke to me in some way. That is God speaking to you. Train yourself to hear the voice of God and to hear as God moves and is talking to you and is telling you things. That's God drawing you to himself. And so before we moved on, I did want to say that. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
So that was, did we finish week 3? Mm-hmm. Okay, so week 4. I got lost in my notes. A prophetic resistance.
Yes.
Daniel 3.
So this is the famous story of the blazing furnace, right? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, right? You go to children's churches, one of the first stories that you learn is about, this famous blazing furnace. And so our interpretation of that is usually all sorts of different things. But actually what it really is a prophetic critique about basically politics. What you didn't learn in children's church. You learned be faithful to Jesus, then you don't get burned, right? But what the story is really about is how a follower of Jesus navigates being faithful to a government and navigates the reality of politics. So Nebuchadnezzar ignores the dream that he was given and is like, it's a great idea. I should build a statue. and just say, everyone, you need to worship this. Like God's like, this is a statue. It's going to fall. This is a representation of your kingdom. And Nebuchadnezzar's like, it's a great idea. We should build a really stinking tall statue and worship it. And I know when we read those kind of things, and I brought this up in the message, it sounds all like those Neanderthals. How simple-minded building their statues. And then I showed the image of the Statue of Liberty on our screen and say, as Americans, we have a statue that we worship too, and it's freedom. Now, obviously, the president's not ordering us all to fly to New York and go bow down before it, but in a lot of ways, we bow down to the God of freedom all the time. And we say freedom over everything. It's my freedom, it's my freedom, it's my freedom, it's my freedom. And so as followers of Jesus, what is our relationship to government? First, we must be aware of the influence America has on us. America is not the kingdom of God. It's important that we know that. And America is a great place to live, and I'm so happy that I'm here, but it is not the kingdom of God. And we need to be mindful of the way that America has an influence on us. The way we look at the world, the way we look at history, the way we look at other people is all formed and shaped by where we come from. I talked about how, like, as New Mexicans, we view the world in a certain way. Imagine if we had to go to Ireland and explain to them a matanza. We sound like savages, right? It's like, well, we have like a big barbecue with a pig. And they're like, oh, yeah, tell me more. Like, do you guys get it butchered in? Well, we actually kill it on spot, butcher it there and cook it all there. And everyone's kind of just in the dirt and in the ground, and you have a good time. And it's like, oh, my gosh, it's like we sound crazy, right? But this is the way that New Mexico has kind of had an influence on us. And so in the same way, America has this way of forming us, especially spiritually, the way that we view the world and where we view what is right and what is wrong. The next thing is that where there's a void of God, what enters that void is politics. And politics become their God, so that when someone's presidential candidate does not get elected, it seems like the world is ending because their God has been dethroned. And so it's about this, and that's why politics is such a touchy subject. I don't know if you guys experienced that at Thanksgiving. There's probably like the murmurs of political conversations, and everyone's like looking around like, shut it down, shut it down, shut it down, because they don't want anything to explode or blow up or conversations, because it's a very sensitive subject for people, especially for people who aren't submitted to the lordship of Jesus, but are submitted to the lordship of the Republican Party or the Democratic Party, right? And so that's where it gets really a lot of tension, a lot of anger, a lot of angst. And as followers of Jesus, we must realize that Jesus is Lord, and that is our politics. And everything else funnels underneath that. And so our relation to government looks like submission to authority. As followers of Jesus, we're clearly called to submit to the government. Now, there's a line that we draw in the sand, right? If ever the government crosses a line that causes us or teaches or calls us to walk away from our allegiance to Jesus, we resist. We say thanks, but no thanks, right? And that's what we learned from Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He was like, bow. And they're like, bro, we appreciate you. You're a great king, but we're not going to bow. You're overstepping your jurisdiction. We're going to humbly and quietly and respectfully say, thank you, but no thanks. How can I help you instead? And kind of have that heart posture where you're creating new paradigms. The next is through nonviolent resistance, and this is so important. That the way that Jesus brought his kingdom was not through sword and shield, but through radical self-giving love. And so we've seen this model beautifully for us in the civil rights movement as Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. led a movement of nonviolent resistance to speak about the issues that were happening. I think a beautiful example in current history, and Jesus did the same exact thing. Even in the garden, you get this image where the soldiers come to arrest Jesus, and what does Peter do? He takes a sword and lops off a dude's ear. Now, most Bible scholars believe he wasn't shooting for the ear, he was going for the head, But he's a fisherman, not a warrior, so, he didn't have the best of aim. And Jesus is like, what are you doing? He says, do you not realize that I could call legions of angels down right now to take care of this whole thing? He says, but we do not bring the kingdom through sword. He says, those who live by the sword die by the sword. And so for us, it's a nonviolent resistance. And then lastly, we just create brand new paradigms. People want to fit you into a box. Are you Republican? Are you Democrat? Are you capitalist? Are you socialist? Are you this? Are you that? And you're just creating whole new paradigms. Like, dude, I'm a follower of Jesus, which means I work really hard and I'm incredibly generous. It means that I care for people who have been marginalized and hurt and abused, and I stand up for areas of justice no matter what that means. And so there's a whole paradigm that we create new paradigms around how we even have conversations around that. And so when Jesus asks, when someone asks you, like, what are you registered as a voter as? Be like, man, I don't do any of that. I'm Jesus' Lord. That's what I'm about. And create brand new paradigms of conversation like Jesus did. Amen. Yeah, the next week was a sermon titled, A Humble Influence. So we went through 2 chapters on this one, which was a lot of reading, but a lot of fun. Not as much reading as our last sermon, but we looked at 2 kings. One was Nebuchadnezzar, and the other one was his son Belshazzar. Nebuchadnezzar was filled with pride, exalted with pride, and God came and warned him and said, if you don't change your ways with another dream, he says, you will become like the beast of the field. And there's all this imagery there about how sin changes us to be like beasts. But he tells him that if you do not change your ways, you will be like the beast. Nebuchadnezzar says, yeah, thanks, but no thanks. And then one day, he's looking at his kingdom, and he's just tooting his own horn. He's like, dude, I'm awesome. Like, look at this place. It's great. There's gold in my jacuzzi, right? He's looking at his place. Like, this place is incredible. And immediately God strikes him with basically insanity. And he becomes like a beast of the field. His nails grow out, his hair grows out, and he starts acting like an animal out in the field, right? This humbling moment. Well, it's in that moment that Nebuchadnezzar realizes, oh, exactly what was told to happen to me happened to me. And eventually, as the season of that ends, he looks up to heaven and he humbles himself. The next story is immediately about his son, who was there the whole time. You know what I mean? He saw his dad like one day be a human and the next day like eating out of a dog food bowl or something. You know, he saw this transformation take place and heard from his father how he needed to humble himself. But when Belshazzar gets to place, he's even more proud than his father. He's so much so that he goes into whenever they took over Israel, they took all of their like important spiritual relics, and some of those were like really important, like chalices, like cups. And he used those as like his red solo cups for his party, just saying like, we don't give a rip about what you guys had. And that's definitely clear defiance against the God of Israel. And so he's having this big old party, and suddenly on the wall, writing starts to appear. And no one knows what it means. And like, how spooky is that? We're just all here having a good time, and then just writing just starts to appear on the plaster. We would freak, and all of us would book it. Like, that place is haunted, cuckoo crazy, right? So we get out of there. So that's exactly how Belshazzar is feeling. So he's calling all of his spiritual advisors, witches, wizards, priests, whoever can come and tell me what's happening here and get this out of here, please come. And Daniel shows up on the scene, and he realizes the writing on the wall, and he interprets that for Belshazzar and says, bro, you didn't ever humble yourself. You did not learn from your father. And because of that, it's going to be all taken away from you. Shortly thereafter, the Medo-Persian Empire comes, kills him, and overtakes his empire. And we learned about being people who are humble. And this is the lesson here. The tale of the two kings is that we would become a people who are humble. 3 things. 1, pride brings destruction. It destroys relationships, it destroys life, it destroys anything for any opportunity for something beautiful to grow. Pride creates distance, relational distance between each of us as we are proud and refuse to humble ourselves. And then pride perpetuates delusions. Have you ever been so proud that you were convinced that you were right even when you were wrong? And even when signs that were showing you that you were wrong, you began to justify why those signs were wrong, than that you are right. And so we talked about 8 things that pride looks like. First, pride looks like self-righteousness or legalism. It's when you begin to think that you're better than everybody else because of the things that you do. Pride looks like comparison. You start to look around and see everybody else's situation and think, I'm better than him, I'm better than her, I'm a better mom than her, I'm a better dad, I'm a better husband than him, whatever it is. And we start comparing ourselves. That's pride. It's exalting yourself based on how you perceive yourself compared to everybody else. At the root of that is pride. The next is false humility. And it's one of my favorite ones to talk about in the church, right? Somebody gives you a compliment or something, and you're right, stop it. No, this old thing, never, And what you're really looking for is more praise, right? It's like, hey, I just want to say you did such a good job. Yeah, I just, I'm such a klutz. I just never do it right. No, you do it right. Really, you think that? And it's like, you're just, tell me more about how awesome I am. It's false humility. The most humble thing you could do when someone gives you a compliment is say what? Thank you. Thank you. Because you know where the gifting and calling comes from. You know where the opportunities that you've been given come from. You know it's not from you, it's from above. And so you could just receive that with thanks. The next is refusing help, right? And any gentleman who's ever put something together without instructions knows this, right? It's you're like, this thing, easy. I'll get it done in 20 minutes. 3.5 hours passes. A wife comes along. You still doing okay, honey? Yeah, I'm fine. These parts aren't right. They're not the right things. I think they shipped the wrong, Do you want the instructions? Instructions. We built fire. We're men, It's pride. It's refusing help. It's refusing to take the help that you need. And there's all sorts of other circumstances and situations like that. Like you're struggling, you don't know how to do something, you don't know how to walk through a certain season, but you're just too proud to ask for help. Humility looks like saying, I don't know everything, I don't pretend to know that I know everything, and I know that the only way the only way that we get through is together. So I'm gonna ask for help. Hey, I know that you know how to do this. Would you help me take a look at this? That's humility. The next is taking advantage of others. That's the flip side of that. When someone's really proud, they are just a relational vacuum, and they just suck the life out of the room, and they just pull everything towards themselves. They're this black hole that everything just dies and consumes in them, right? And they take advantage of other people when they offer their help. And that's also pride. It's saying it's about me, me, me. And you know those people. You know, anytime you have a conversation with them, they always go on for 35 minutes about how they are, and they never once have asked you how you are, you know? And if you're like, I don't know anybody like that, you might be the one I'm talking about, you know? The next one is greed, and this is just where I need to have more for myself, more for me, more for me, more for me, more for me, and that looks like all sorts of different ways, being stingy with our money, being stingy with our resources, being stingy in a moment where there's an opportunity to be generous, et cetera, et cetera. Next is entitlement. Pride looks like thinking that everybody owes you something. Well, nobody told me this. I wish my friends were better friends, you know. On Instagram, I say, whatever, right? And it's like, but you're not a good friend. You just think that everybody and everything is all around and about you. And the last is defensive-ness. That anytime anybody's ever come to you and said, hey, bro, like, just so you know, like, it was hurtful that you said that. Or, you know, I felt that you were being a little, me? You? Have you heard how you sound? Or whatever it is, right? It's already defensive. Well, I only did that because she said, and it's like this whole pride. Humility looks like, man, I didn't mean to be that way. You know, tell me more about how have I been that way before? Like, you know, that's humility. And so those are a couple of signs. And so we say that humility is laying down your need to be right, full, first, and in control, and picking up the gift of being loved, dependent, last, and surrendered. And so, yeah.
None of those points spoke to me in any way, shape, or form. And so I think this has just been incredible to hear about what all of you guys are struggling with. I remember hearing that message for the first time after every point, and I was like, is it possible to struggle with all of the points of pride? Because this doesn't seem fair. And so I know we're all in the same boat there. How does this speak to leadership?
Yes. So us being a humble people means how we deal with leadership. So, I mean, specifically in the story of Daniel, right, we're looking at these two kings and how followers of Jesus are to be humble to those who are in authority. So one, we know this, authority is given, so we honor it. The Bible is clear that government structures and authorities are designed by God. Now, it doesn't mean that God voted for the politician who won, but it means that he's established the system. So whether good, bad, you like it or you don't, we need to honor those in authority, because that's what the Bible calls us to as humble servants of Jesus. And so it doesn't mean you agree with everything that they do. It doesn't mean you're in their corner cheering them on, celebrating them, but it means that you honor them, which means you show respect. You give respect where respect is due, is what Paul the Apostle says. The next thing is character matters, so we value it. I've seen so many followers of Jesus get behind, endorse, get in bed with politicians and politics that are counter the way of Jesus, and have no concern for character of a person. As followers of Jesus, that's not the way that we handle it. Character matters, so we value it in us and in our leaders. I made mention that the reason negative ads work is because we allow them to work. Politicians wouldn't run those ads, Andrew Rael stealing money, you know, those kind of ads, if we would call our politicians to a higher standard. Like, dude, what's not going to work is belittling or bashing the other person. We want to hear based on the merits and the values of the ideas that you bring forward. And the way we do that is by being a people who demand that from our leaders. Yeah. Saying, character matters to us. So just saying, they're the worst, don't you not trust their face? You're going to have substance to what you're saying and prove to us that you have the competency to lead. And the last is influence is powerful, so we're humble with it. We realize that leadership is not just about people who are in places of authority and power, but leadership is about where you are right here, right now. There are people who look up to you in your workplace, in your family, in your friendships. And as followers of Jesus, we must realize that we have influence, so what we do with it matters, so we're humble with it. We're never careless with it. We consider our ways thoroughly. We do, as what Paul says, is walk circumspectly, walk wisely in the times that we're in.
Week 6.
Yep.
Oh no, what we're gonna do? The king likes Daniel. No one? VeggieTales? Okay, never mind. Daniel in the lion's den. I was like, we're just breaking out in song in the middle of this thing.
No one caught that one. So Daniel in the lion's den, right? This is like the super, super famous story. But this whole message was centered around not being called to a life of comfortability, but to conviction, right? It was Daniel's unwillingness to compromise his prayer life that got him in the lion's den. Now, I think we kind of think in our minds VeggieTales and like cartoon, it's like these little animated lions, but it's like, and we think about our zoo, and we're like, if I got thrown in there, I probably could survive because they're just, but I want you to think about like National Geographic, like in the wild lions. You know what I mean? Those dudes are scary. You know what I'm saying? You've seen them get the gazelle. You're way slower than a gazelle, right? It's donezo. It's over. And so for Daniel,
Especially me. I'm slower.
So Daniel, right? It's real. And so for him, what following Jesus is not about getting you out of circumstances that are uncomfortable. It's about being with you through them. Yeah. Daniel got thrown into the den, and the lions were there, and he stayed there overnight. It wasn't that God, like he got thrown in and then God just levitated him out and was like, just kidding, you know? He was in there the entire time and heard them in the corner or whatever, right? And was probably fervently praying the entire time. Please don't let me, please don't let me. You know, he was freaked out, as we all would be, but was unwilling to compromise on who he was. And so, as I said clearly, we're not called to a life of comfortability, but to conviction. And so comfort is the soil in which apathy grows. When we're so worried about being comfortable, we become apathetic. We become careless about things that should matter to us, don't matter to us anymore because we're just so comfortable, right? And I use that analogy of when you get into bed late at night and you realize that you left the light on, you start reasoning to yourself about how you can live with the light on. You're like, it's fine, I can sleep with the light on, right? Or you begin to look around for something to launch at the light switch to be able to turn it off from where you are because you're so comfortable, right? And so we do this all the time. And then the pursuit of comfort is the death of conviction. When your whole life's pursuit is just trying to be comfortable, you'll never live a life of conviction or consequence. You'll just always be pursuing the next easiest thing and then look back on your life and think, what a waste. Yeah, I was comfortable the entire time, but I never did anything. I never loved anyone. It never cost me anything. And so Daniel was able to resist the pull of Babylon because of the practices that he had still in his life. And so we talked about as a church, we lose our power when we fall into hypocrisy. And the way that we fight against hypocrisy is by establishing our framework, establishing our witness, and establishing our power, right? So we establish our framework. Our framework is God's word and submitting ourselves to his word. Our witness is the greater story and reality that we call others to. And our power is the power that raised Jesus from the dead now lives inside of us. So we reclaim those things and use those as an opportunity to witness, as Daniel did in the den.
I was convicted about the analogy with the light because we got a Google Assistant and smart outlets, so that from bed we could specifically just say, "Hey Google, turn off the lights." So I am in that mode of comfort and not conviction there. In week 7, we talk about a hopeful promise, which is also Daniel 7.
Yeah. So we see in Daniel 7, right, the crazy vision that Daniel gets of the Son of Man. And it's this figure who ascends on the cloud into the throne room of God as God is dealing with these beasts that have been in previous visions, etc. It's a lot to go in now. If you missed it, please go back and listen to the messages, and you know exactly what I'm talking about. But the big idea is this. Kingdoms become beasts when they become overcome by the beast of sin. This idea of sin being a beast is all throughout the scriptures. In Genesis, with the famous story of Cain and Abel, right? Where Cain is jealous of his brother Abel because God received a sacrifice and not his. And God warns Cain. He says, sin is crouching at your door and its desire is to overcome you. It's this idea of like a lion chilling in the grass, waiting to attack the gazelle. He says that's what sin does. And what ultimately happens? Sin does overcome him and he murders his brother. Right, and that's the image all throughout the scriptures. All the prophets like to use this imagery of beasts to talk about kings and corrupt kingdoms, right? And even in the Revelation, right, the Revelation of Jesus was written by John. All the imagery used of Rome is that of beasts. And so some people take that thing and think it's literally a beast with 7 hairs and 9 horns, but it's actually just this imagery of corrupt kingdoms. And there's a lot to go in there that we don't have time for today. So listen to the messages that might help, and then we can talk about further discussions. But all that to say that kingdoms become beasts when they're overcome by the beast of sin. So while we're in this tension of living under corrupt kingdoms, we got to know 2 things. One, God is with you in the waiting, right? That God was actively working against the beasts and powers that be, and that God is working through you in the waiting. That in the meantime, God is using you in your life to overcome these beasts and these kingdoms and establish God's kingdom here on earth as it is in heaven. And that our ultimate hope is when Jesus confronts and destroys those beasts one day, when all the kingdoms fall at the one true kingdom, which is his.
And last week was the conclusion of
Yes.
this series. We covered several chapters, 4 of them.
8 through 12. 5.
5 of them.
8,
Math.
9, 10, 11, 12.
There we go. Comfort.
Yeah.
Again, my brain. Wow. So that was the end of the series last week, and we kind of recapped. And I loved the way that you did it. For those of you that weren't here, if you don't listen to any of the series messages if you weren't here and you didn't listen to any of the series online, please listen to that last one. It was really powerful. And go ahead and go into that.
Yeah, so the end half of Daniel is all of these different visions and conversations around kingdoms and battling. It's like a telenovela. It's like this king rises, kills that guy. This guy rises, this kills that guy. He has a bigger army, and they fight again. That's all that whole end part is. And then it's about some like crazy dreams that Daniel has and how they're all interpreted. So there's a lot there, and I go through a majority of it in the message. So the big idea is this: kingdoms rise and kingdoms fall, right? But the hope for followers of Jesus is in this idea that when Jesus establishes his kingdom, that means that the hope for us is this great enemy that is death will be reversed. And we looked at the story in John 11 where Jesus raises Lazarus from the grave. And how there's all sorts of circumstances and situations in our life where we ask, like Mary and Martha did, where were you, God? Is what the first thing they tell Jesus when he shows up and Lazarus is dead. They said, where were you? You should have been here. You should have been here to help us. If you would have been here, our brother wouldn't have died. And Jesus says, surely your brother will rise again. And Martha, being a good Bible scholar, is like, I know at the end, but like now, where were you now? And Jesus is like, I am the resurrection and the life.
Yeah.
That he who believes in me will never die. And that's the hope that he gives him. And then he literally calls to Lazarus to rise from the grave. And I always try to be really important to not be in Bible study mode when we hear that. You're like, yes, that's good. He rose from the dead. But to imagine you're at a funeral and some dude shows up and is like, hey, Andrew, get out of there. And then the dirt starts to stink and move and the casket open. You'd freak. You'd freak. Right? And that's what happened. And Jesus says, get those grave clothes off of him, and he sets him free. But right, a few things that we wanted to take away there. One, that Jesus weeps with us. As we're in between these phases of the kingdom that is and the kingdom that's going to come, Jesus' heart breaks with us at the reality of sin and brokenness in the world. The next is our glorious future is when death is reversed. That our ultimate hope is not in our circumstances getting better, but it's in the resurrection hope that we have at the end of our lives. And lastly, we live our lives not fixed on seen things, but on unseen things. That's what Paul says. He says, we look forward to that glorious hope. He says, if we were to weigh out on the scale all the pain, suffering, hurt, and brokenness that we have here on earth with the glory that's to be revealed in the coming days, he says, it's not even equal. The glory far outweighs the pain. Not to make little of the pain that we have now, but to put it in perspective of the glorious future that we have. And the great encouragement is this: no matter what is lost here and now, God is in the business of redeeming all things. And so even if things don't go our way, right, we know that God can speak to a grave and say, rise, and they will.
And I think perspective matters. I love how you touched on that. And I think that for a lot of us, that has been happening for us entirely this year as our perspective is changing, as our reality is not exactly what we would like it to be or what we want it to be or what we'd hoped and dreamed it would be. We are forcing ourselves to look above, come above the situation and be able to see things from God's perspective. And so that was the end, that was the recap of this series in Daniel. And I believe that it's the perfect launching board into 2021 because we believe that God is not done writing the story for our city that he's going to use our church for in this next year. And so what are some things coming up that we're looking forward to in 2021?
I'm glad you asked. So Together 2021. So we're casting a vision for things that we want to see done in 2021. 2020 was like this constant, I felt like I was in a fight with Mike Tyson and was desperately losing, you know? I was just getting rocked every month, it felt like. But we're really hoping and longing that 2021 will be a year that we can really build again and that we could really dream again. It was so funny at the last year, we had started with the whole Vision series. It was like, Vision series 2020, we're going to do this, we're going to go here, we're going to do these things. And then it was like, it was like, as time, it was like, we didn't even have church, we lost our building, all kinds of things happened. And it was like, if only I had known, So don't go listen to that message, please. But for 2021, we really want to set a vision for what we believe God wants to do in this upcoming year. And we want to know that, listen, we don't get there because Jake and I try really hard, or because the sound team or anybody else who's serving is trying really hard. We get there together. A church isn't built, Brian Houston says this, a church isn't built on the gifts and talents of a few, but on the sacrifices of many. Yeah. The only way we get to where God wants to take us is together. You and me together, seeing God change our city with the hope of Jesus. So we have a couple 2021 initiatives that we really want to launch. The first is relaunch community groups. So these were a lifeline for us during when the pandemic first hit, because all gatherings stopped except for our community groups, who were still able to meet, and they were just life to our bones, because that was where we were able to still like see each other and have social interaction and enjoy just being with the believers and talking about life and praying for one another. But here towards the end of the year, our community leaders were just feeling it, man. Everyone just kind of had a really hard, long stretch, so we just kind of put a pause on those things and said, get some rest, replenish back up, and we'll launch again back in 2021. And that's what we want to do. And so community groups for us are really the life of our church. And we realize that even if we lose Sunday gatherings, they can never take our community groups, you know? Yeah. And so this is really important for us. And so I'm not cavalier in saying this. I would much rather have you, if in a week you had to choose between a community group and Sunday service, I'd much rather you choose a community group over Sunday service. Because we believe that the church happens best around a table, not a stage. And so this here is for the equipping, the sending, the empowering, the worshiping together as a body. But real community happens around a table where you could share life and pray for each other and just enjoy those things. So we're going to relaunch community groups. So with that being said, they're going to relaunch again in February. But if you're interested in hosting a community group or leading a community group, come talk to me after service. We'd love to get you squared away. We'd love to get you all trained up and all that kind of stuff. If you want to open up your home and allow that to happen, we would love to empower you to do that. So please, please, please come see me after service. We'll get you in like a group chain and stuff like that. We'll start training. We'll start doing all that fun stuff. But we're going to start doing that stuff now so that when February comes, we're not running around like a bunch of chickens with our head cut off, but we actually have plans in order. And then they'll pick like strategic dates. And as those dates come out for like, hey, we're going to do a Wednesday night or a Thursday night or a Monday night or a Saturday night, whatever those dates look like, you can sign up based on what makes most sense for you as far as availability for your schedule. And then you'll be a part of a whole new community of people. And so I heard nothing but great things from our community groups last year and how much they enjoyed it, and how at first it's like awesome and exciting and new, and then as time goes on, it's like everyone's real sides get to come out, and it's like this moment where you get to like actually start to learn people. But man, it's such a joy. And then what was really funny is even after community groups kind of ended, how the community groups still like just stayed together and huddled and still had things to do together. So it was really awesome. But that's the goal, is to relaunch community groups in 2021.
Perfect.
Yeah. The next thing we want to do, and this is exciting, and this will be a first here at Zion, is we want to do baptisms. Yeah. So there have been people who have come to life in Jesus in our church. Yeah. And we believe that the next important step for them to take is a step of baptism, where they become a part of the family of God by going into the water, as Paul says, taking a part in the life and death, resurrection story of Jesus. Now, to do baptisms logistically is a little bit harder than you might think. And so for us, we're going to need to get some resources and some logistics and some just kind of figure out things, how we're going to do it, how we want to do baptisms, because there's nothing worse than getting baptized in like freezing cold water. So we don't want to do that to people, you know. And so we're trying to navigate how we're going to do those things. We're trying to work out logistics of that. But next year, our goal is to do baptisms and have people who have come to life in our church take the step forward and baptize in the name of the Lord Jesus. The next thing we have planned is what's called House of Learning. So we believe that the church is fundamentally a house of learning. And so a couple different endeavors we're doing in 2021. The first is we're going to be doing a preaching and teaching course. So those of you who feel the call of God on your life to teach the Bible, I'm going to be doing a class where I teach you how to teach the Bible. And next year, we're going to have people who come up and teach the Bible. Yeah, it was not me. So we're really excited about that. We got some people that we're already in conversations with about those things. And so there'll be a preaching and teaching course early next year. I don't have a date just yet, but that'll be happening next year to empower some people to teach, come up and share God's word. The next is the 5-year journey. So the 5-year journey is a pastoral apprenticeship program that we're running here at Zion, where an individual commits to 5 years at our church, and they go from where they are today to ultimately becoming a pastor at the end of those 5 years. What essentially I've done is I've put together a course over the next 5 years of what I wish somebody would have done for me. I learned by the School of Hard Knocks, which I do not recommend for a lot of reasons, but I felt very unequipped. It was like showing up to a war with a water gun. You know what I mean? What? This is what I got stuck with, you know? And so I created basically a class and a course to help walk people through that transition. So those who feel that they have a call in their life to pastoral ministry, We believe very strongly here, as in the scriptures, it says, do not hastily lay hands on people. And we believe that the call of God is something that happens over time, and character development really matters. So we're not quick to just put people in places of authority and power. They're free to serve, but to have places of authority and power, those come after time. So that's the 5-year journey, which we're actually having a meeting today for the first class of our 5-year journey. And so we're really excited about that. And then we'll have more classes of 5-year journeys sometime in the future, whenever we feel that there's another class of people who want to come up and become pastors. And then the last one is basics. So as you guys know, if you were here, we did a basics class for anybody who was at that time serving. If you missed that class because of scheduling conflicts, no worries, we're going to run another one in the spring, and we'll do that periodically throughout the year. And basics class is basically like what Zion's DNA is, what we believe, what we're about, what we're passionate about. It kind of addresses some frequently asked questions, and we do like a lot of like theological work there. I talk really fast, and it's like an hour long, so I try to get you out of here as soon as I can, but that's the class that's required for anybody who wants to serve, just so all of us on the same page, and there's no surprises of like, oh, you guys believe X, Y, or Z, and all of us share the same DNA, culture, heartbeat. So that's House of Learning. The next thing, nights of worship, prayer, and spiritual gifts. So we believe in the gifts of the Spirit, and we believe that there's just some sacred time that we need to carve out to seek God and to seek His face and to pray and to worship. So next year, dates TBD, we'll be having times of worship and prayer. Sometimes it might happen on a Sunday morning where we just come here and worship and pray and just ask Jesus to be here. Other days it might happen on a special night. It might happen through our community groups where we're like a couple times throughout the year, our community groups are funneling out these nights of worship and prayer. And so all that, a lot of those details are still in the air, but this is part of the vision that we want to cast for next year. The next is children's expansion. Oh yeah. So our kiddos in the back room right now. My wife is the pastor of Ninos, and she's absolutely crushing it and doing an amazing job. If you've ever been in a small space with a handful of kids, the space becomes incredibly smaller, faster. They're quick, they're agile, and they're sneaky, And so what we want to do is, this room is working great, and it's working perfect for what we have, but any more than 10 kids in the room, and it is sheer pandemonium. And it's like they all bounce off each other. You know what I mean? It's like one starts getting hype, and then the other starts getting hype, and all of them start getting hype, and they're the teachers who are like, no, So what we want to do is actually expand to the next room over, get that next room over ready. If you've been back there, you've seen it is not fit for children in that next room. So we have a lot of work that we need to do. You should have seen the whole building when we got it. We have a lot of work that we need to do kind of over in that next room to get that next space ready. So that's something that we're wanting to do in 2021 as well. Right now, we're like perfect with the room size that we have, but any more families start to come, and we're going to start having some problems back there, So we want to make sure to kind of get that before it comes and get over to that next room. And the last thing are our justice initiatives, and this is what we're really excited about. One of the core values that we have at Zion City Church is radical generosity. And so for the last couple of years, we've been looking for strategic financial partners to partner with in our city to help bring the gospel to people and to help really just alleviate the pain and suffering of our city. So the first that we're going to want to partner with next year is El Ranchito de los Niños. It's a long word. It's an orphanage here in town that just takes kids in and loves on them. We've done work with them for many years. I did in previous pastoral positions that I had. And we would really love to just partner with them financially and just continue to get them resources and things that they need to help care for orphans in our city. The next group is the Valencia County Domestic Shelter. Domestic violence in New Mexico is like one of the number one crimes, especially even in our county. Speaking with local police officers and first responders, that says that the call they get the most often is domestic violence. And so as a community, we really want to rally around the cause of helping people get free out of domestically violent relationships and find healing and hope. And so we want to partner with Valencia County Domestic Shelters. They get people resources to find a place to stay, get groceries, get resources, especially as they make the really difficult decision to leave an abusive relationship. And as followers of Jesus, it's something we really want to get behind and support. And the last one is CareNet. We believe in helping young pregnant moms who feel like they have no other option to know that they have options. And we don't want to just say that in good and deed and say, oh, well, good luck. And we want to be really there with financial resources and ways to help pregnant moms who are facing, incredibly hard times to be able to realize that they can do it. They can be moms. They can have resources. They are surrounded. And so we want to partner with our local CareNet to be able to help provide resources for those expecting moms. And so these are things that we want to do and really want to step forward in. And so, like I said, we need your help. It's not just going to be done by 2 people or 3 people doing that, but it's going to be not on the gifts and talents of few, but on the sacrifices of many. We're anticipating for all those new things, it's going to be about $13,000 to get all those things kind of off the ground. And this is aside from our budget we already have for building and building maintenance, and the heater went out and the toilet that's broken. This is like aside from all those different things. This is just for those initiatives that we had talked about. And so here's what we want to do. We want to ask you to partner with us. As we come to the closing of this year and the starting of the next year, what we want to ask you to do is just pray. Pray about giving a gift above and beyond your normal tithes and offerings to give towards this initiative. The reality is, if there's not funding for it, we just can't do it. We don't have the bandwidth, the energy, the resources to expend on those things. And so we're going to ask you guys to really partner with us in this above and beyond Together 2021 vision. Here within the next few weeks, we're going to have a special giving tab on our website that whenever you give, or if you give at the Agape box, you can write Together 2021. There'll be a special tab that you go when you give. Instead of giving to the general fund, you'll give to the Together 2021. And we want to reach at least half of this goal by the end of our vision series next year, which will be February 14th. We want to at least reach half of that goal to be able to get rolling on some of those things that we really want to do. But again, it only happens if we do it together. So I'm just going to ask you guys just to pray. Pray that the Lord would lead you to an amount or something like that that you want to give above and beyond your normal tithes and offerings to help us reach these initiatives that we believe God has tucked away in our hearts this year.
And one thing I want to say real quick too, you look at a number like this, well, I'll speak for myself. I look at a number like this and I think, that is impossible. And that's not even that big of a number. But I remember before we got this building, we saw the space and we saw what it was. And we saw the potential. And we're now living and existing in that potential.
Yeah.
But it was very hard to see that before, especially when we had zero finances, very, a small amount of people that were committed to this church at the time. And it's just, and so it's hard to see what is not yet in existence. And so if this number scares you, or if any number amount scares you, don't think about the big number. Think about what God has already done in your life and what he wants to continue to do in your life. God has done something unique, I believe, in our relationship and our lives. And we kind of put our feet on the pavement, so to speak, and we're like, okay, we're going to, with faith, just move forward with what we believe God has told us to do. And so because we have done that, it has created a small opportunity for you people to be here. And now that you guys are here, and many of you have brought people with you, they have experienced similarly what God has done in your life and has spoken to you. And so I want you guys to think about just the small impact that you guys can have in your circle around you, and the larger impact that you guys can have in the future of what God wants to do through this church. And so if you don't have 13 grand, don't be afraid. Neither do I, or neither does Andrew. And so, but we all have something that we can give. And like he talked about, it's not the gifts of a few, but the generosity of many. And so we're believing that God is going to provide these things for us, and we're taking God in faith that this is going to happen. And so please partner with us and pray about all of these things coming up in the following year.
Yeah. And that's all, folks. No, I'm just kidding. So you want to pray us out, and then we'll wrap it up?
Sure, absolutely. Father, thank you so much for this day. God, I thank you for, Lord, just these incredible people, Lord.